Please listen carefully.
Gathered the afternoon into my glass. I got 100 proof, simple to crack.
The Clubmen 1645, and today we're back in Somerset. And we were in Somerset earlier on in July because we went to the Polden Hills to work the Clubmen there who wrote a petition, Marshall's Elm, I believe, and it was sent back to Wells, and we are in Wells today. We've had the relief of Taunton, we've had the Battle of Langport, we've had the relief of Bridgewater, the Battle of Bridgewater, and we're about to have the surrender of Bath, and Prince Rupert is in Bristol. But we've come back to Wells today because in July 28, 1645, and through Somerset itself, in the Western Campaign after the Battle of Naseby, the tide changed in the English Revolution, because this is where they started paying for provision and quarter. Yep, the new model army was sort of becoming a professional army, and they were paying for provision and quarter, and it swung it in Somerset because there was vast numbers of clubmen in this area. And Gorwin had been talking with the clubmen. He had 3 meetings with them at 7 different rendezvous, and Prince Rupert had met with them outside Bristol, and Gorwin have actually talked with the clubmen even earlier on in July. And the Western clubmen in Somerset have sided with the parliamentarian side, Fairfax, at the Battle of Bridgewater, and Humphrey Willis is a famous clubman, which there's some publications later on with Humphrey Willis. But the clubmen in the area went with the parliamentarians, the Western clubmen as such, and it was the provision and paying of quarter which swung it. I think so anyway. And if those numbers have gone over to the royalist side, that would have been a different outlook in the Western campaign, because it would have been, the numbers would have been more royalist, and it might have changed the tide in the Western campaign and changed where the English Revolution went to after 1645. And maybe this was an important area in itself, as much important as the Battle of Naseby was, because this is where Gorwin and the royalists failed to recruit any more troops. Fairfax was still recruiting troops on the way, and he was still pressing men because there was a letter sent through, so we're still pressing men in the area, so it wasn't all sort of one-way traffic as such. I mean, the parliamentarians were pretty nasty themselves. We know Massey could be put up to some pretty bad deeds in his history, but yeah, and that's what I want to say really about the importance of the paying of provision and quarter. John Lilburn, did I mention John Lilburn at the start?
Haven't yet.
Well, John Lilburn interestingly read a letter out. It was sent from Somerset by Fairfax, and it mentions the people in the area were astonished because they'd never fingered soldiers' money before. So there you go. It's a very important point, and it gets missed, I think, sometimes about the Civil War, where the tide of the people went. Is such, because they could have gone the other way, but the new Parliament was professional and they started paying their way, and it made a massive difference. But there's another letter I want to read out from here which talks about Dorset, and it's not so pleasant because it talks about them being seditious, mischievous and malignant. And it was wrote from Wales here in a council of war. But the interesting thing about the letter is it actually talks about we've got to quash this movement, or side with this movement, or win them over, because if it goes through the country it could destroy Parliament. I think it's caused the destruction of Parliament. I think that's in the letter itself. Whereas they were very aware of the clubmen and keeping them on side, or quashing them, or to stop it, because it was, as they talked, they said they were led without a lord, without a gentleman even, and they were starting to see authority, not recognise authority, and issuing their own warrant, which was frowned upon by both sides. But there you go, keeping on the Clubmen website, Clubmen 1645, work in progress. Just to end on another note, because it's worth mentioning how I mentioned about the clubmen were viewed by both sides, and there's a parliamentarian newspaper which states, "This third party hath peeped for many months in many corners. They will have an army without a king, a lord, or a gentleman almost." And there's a letter from Sprigg, which is also very interesting, because it says, "Had not been crushed in the egg," that is the clubmen movement itself, "it had on an instant run all over and might have bred destruction upon the Parliament." So that's the importance they thought about the clubmen. They thought it was a movement in itself. Could you say movement? I don't know if it's a movement, but it was a reaction against the Civil War, but it could lead into something else as such, you know what I mean? Because it's sort of, if it gained momentum, maybe it had taken its own direction.
Wasn't it referred to as the third force?
Yeah, the third force, yeah. The inferior sort.
The inferior sort.
The inferior sort. Know your place, Sheila. Yes,
Sorry.
the inferior sort. Both of us would be the inferior sort, because we'd have been clubmen.
We would have been.
Yeah. Well, you might have been more level, but I would definitely been a clubman. But there you go. But this is the letter that was wrote from Wales. Here it is. Now I printed this letter out. Can you pick that up?
Yes, I can see that.
But half of it's missing. But it's it talks about the Dorset clubmen, and they're saying they're full of sedition and very dangerous. Yeah, and it goes on to talk about if they've been itching or desire for their own power and mischief, how dangerous that was, and they had to quash it. And you could say the new model army in Somerset, through paying of quarter and provision, did quash it to some extent. But there you go. Keep it on the Clubmen site, Clubmen 1645, and work in progress.
Repeatable pattern, I'll be terrible art.
Bridgewater, the relief of Taunton, the back of Langport, and a very loud motorbike. Clubmen 1645, and today we're back in Dorset, and we're in.
No, we're not today. We're not
in Somerset. Well, welcome to Clubmen 1645, and we're back in Somerset. And as you know, we went to the Polden Hills earlier on, and we were talking about Marshall's Elm there, and the Clubmen meeting there went to Chalk Valley. Is it Chalk Valley? No, it's what's the name of that village? garrison, and the garrisons would be in. Oh, sorry.